All right, welcome back to Breakdown. This is episode 7, and I am absolutely giddy ecstatic to introduce the fact that we have the poet, king of New York with us today, Mr. Willie Perdomo. Willie, welcome to Breakdown, the Poet and the Poems. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, I think I think the fact that you want to talk about one book and one specific book is really interesting to me. So I appreciate the invitation.
All right, so to start off, I do want to read your bio. Willie Perdomo is the author of Smoking Lovely, The Remix, The Crazy Bunch, The Essential Hits of Shorty Bon Bon, and Where a Nickel Costs a Dime. Winner of the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Cy Twombly Award for Poetry and the Penn Book Award. Perdomo was also a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Poetry Society of America Norma Farber First Book Award. He is co-editor of the anthology Latínext, and his work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Poetry, Washington Post, The Best American Poetry 2019, and African Voices. He teaches at Phillips Exeter Academy and was recently appointed New York State Poet Laureate, aka the Poet King of New York State. Welcome to Breakdown. All right. So, one of the things that I do is I create a blurb for the book. Are you ready?
Hmm.
Okay. Woo. And my blurb, whenever I do a blurb, I try to share what my experience with the book is. Yes? Okay. In his book, Where a Nickel Cost a Dime, young poet Willie Perdomo inhales brisas de la isla, breezes from the island as he roams the streets of Harlem searching for poems. Because of his street cred and poetic righteousness, the poems come out one by one to greet him. Together, they baptize the forgotten and the invisible, creating sacred space in the midst of the otherwise profane.
Thank you. That was right on. That was it, right? How the poems greet you. Yeah. Thank you.
I was like, yo, this brother creates a sacred space in this book for things that most people don't consider sacred, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's about right. I think I was talking about this earlier. I had an earlier class visit, and the idea that as poets, we resist against the forces of erasure, and with a book like this is it's interesting because you're right. Young poet is the operative phrase here, right? The book came out when I was 28, but I think the poems that are included in the book were written um, my first attempt at college. So I was about 19 when I wrote some of those poems, and subsequently sort of revised some of them. Um, but I was always attracted to poets who wrote about what might be called the lower depths, right? Langston Hughes made it all right to talk about the blues, to talk about people in bars, people running numbers, people on the street. And sometimes he caught flack for that by the bourgeois folks, the talented tenth, if you will, who might have taken him to task for writing about the street. Why would you do that? Same for maybe a poet like Nicolas Guillen, who used the song uh, in his poetry, which was considered a less than sophisticated form, but really was the ultimate form that he had to use to express and to sort of realize his vision. So, um, so yeah, For me, it was definitely a young poet book. I didn't. The world was my text. The street was my text. The city was my book. And I didn't come out of a MFA program. I didn't come out of a workshop. I basically read my way into the book, using poems from and poets from the Harlem Renaissance, the Black Arts Movement, some of the Beat Generation poets, the New York School of Poems, and by the time I found the New Eurekan School of Poetry, I had found the missing link uh, for it. So um, yeah, it had that young poet feel, and it had that um, you know, again, I didn't come out of any formal training uh, when I went writing the book. So it's a special book for me because of that.
So I want to clarify something. What I
Hmm.
was thinking when I said young poet, I was thinking about how amazing it was that for you to be at such a young age, you were invested in seeing the world around you at an age when most of us don't see anybody but ourselves, right? And our own desires and our own whatever, because we're so, I mean, that's part of the job description of being 19, 23, or whatever. It's all about me and all about us. But to me, it was really interesting that at that very, very young age, you saw yourself connected to everything around you and you saw the need to create, or not create sacred space, but bring forth the sacred space in everything around you, right? Give that visibility. So let's read a poem. Would you
Hmm.
start with, would you read the dedication, and then right after that please read Where I'm From on page 17?
It's weird. The last time I read from this book, I rarely read poems from this book. I was interested in the invitation to sort of talk about it because I rarely get a chance to talk about it. The last time I talked about this was with the book critic, or the former book critic for the Washington Post, Ron Charles, and we had a conversation. He had these talks that was sponsored by the Library of Congress at the old U.S. Naval Hospital in D.C. Um, and so I had to revisit some of these poems as well. It says, "Para mi madre Carmen, for being the mother and father. Perdóname, madre mía, for the nights you cried to sleep while Papa was falling. And con amor para Riri, who on a rainy October morning led a skinny Puerto Rican kid into her Harlem brownstone and gave him the world. Shout out to the believers and disbelievers. One love." And then you say where I'm from. So there's a story behind this particular poem, and this poem has been often used in classrooms all over the country as a segue into writing about place. I know this because teachers have told me how much they've appreciated the poem and used the poem in their classroom. This poem really started off in the Tower Hall of Ithaca College, which was my first attempt at college. And there was this one white boy, I forget his name, but he was from Louisville, and he
Oh,
used
no,
to
no,
call
no, no. Willie is Louisville.
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 Thank
My
you.
people from Kentucky. Yeah.
I hear you. So he used to call me Wilbur, and he asked me where I was from one day, and my my dorm room, I had a single, was minimally decorated. All I had was a typewriter, an electric Olympia electric typewriter, my desk, my bed, and a poster of New York City subway
Mm.
map. And I pointed to 125th Street, and I said, "That's where I'm from." And then maybe months later, or even a year later, I don't recall, I started writing this poem as a response to the question. And maybe that's really where my writing process started, right? Who's asking us the questions, and how are we responding
Mm-hmm.
to these questions in our art? Where I'm from, because she liked the kind of music that I listened to, and she liked the way I walked as well as the way I talked. She always wanted to know where I was from. If I said that I was from 110th Street and Lexington Avenue, right in the heart of a transported Puerto Rican town, where the Jodedores live and night turns to day without sleep, do you think then she might know where I was from? Where I'm from, Puerto Rico stays on our minds when the fresh breeze of café con leche y pan con mantequilla comes through our half-open windows and under our doors while the sun starts to rise. Where I'm from, babies fall asleep to the bark of a German shepherd named Tarzan. We hear his wandering footsteps under midnight sun. Tarzan has learned quickly to ignore the woman who begs her man to stop slapping her with his fist. Please, baby, por favor, I swear it wasn't me. I swear to my mother, Mommy. Her dead mother told her this would happen one day. Where I'm from, Independence Day is celebrated every day. The final gunshot from last night's murder is followed by the officious knock of a warrant squad coming to take your bread, coffee, and freedom away. Where I'm from, the police come into your house without knocking. They throw us off rooftops and say we slipped. They shoot my father and say he was crazy. They put a bullet in my head and said they found me that way. Where I'm from, you run to the hospital emergency room because some little boy spit a razor out of his mouth and carved a crescent into your face. But you have to understand, where I'm from, even the dead have to wait until their number is called. Where I'm from, you can listen to Big Daddy retelling stories on his corner. He passes a pint of light Bacardi, pouring the dead's tributary swig onto the street. I'm God when I put a gun to your head. I'm the judge and you're in my courtroom. Where I'm from, it's the late night scratch of rats' feet that explains what my mother means when she says slowly, Bueno, mijo, eso es la vida del pobre. Well, son, that is the life of the poor. Where I'm from, it's sweet, like my grandmother reciting a quick prayer over a pot of hot rice and beans. Where I'm from, it's pretty, like my niece stopping me in the middle of the street and telling me to notice all the stars in the sky.
Okay, so I have to tell you what got me about this poem, right? The part where even the dead, ugh, I put a note right here. Even the dead have to wait until their number is called. Um, just reminded me that there was so much death, right? Even death has to wait to be processed, right?
Mm.
But to see all of that and to see what many people would consider tragedy, poverty, violence, all of that, but still there's a moment when people still look up at the sky and see the stars. And it would be so easy to miss them, especially if you always have to be looking over your shoulder because you never know what's going to happen, right? And I was like, how beautiful it was for him to be able to end with the stars, because the stars in the sky represent infinite possibility, even in a place like this. And what's even more incredible to me, now that you told me the background of the poem, right? The brother who, or the guy who asked you where you're from, that started this poem, was from Louisville. And when we think of Louisville now, we think of Breonna Taylor
Mm.
and the police busting into her house without knocking on the door, which you describe in this piece, damn near as if it was prophetic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was interesting because I was reading it and I was like, okay, this book is how old? And this poem has not lost its place or its groove or its relevance at all. Do you think that where you're from has changed much?
I mean, I don't. It would be hard for me to speak on that because it's been years since I had moved out of East Harlem. I think while my mother was still alive, however, I would come and visit her. And from in that context, yes, there was a lot of change, i.e., gentrification
Mm,
going on in East Harlem. A lot of people were priced out of Harlem. A lot of condominiums, specialty stores, uh, big blockbuster sort of mega malls as well happening. So there was that part that had changed, the economic so-called development change. They start to rezone things, which of course affects where you can send your kid to school. So there was that part that was transforming that I could notice with my bare eye and what I was reading about, and then talking to people who lived in the community still. The part that um, had not changed was um, the the fraction of the community that lived under the poverty level, the conditions in which uh, my homies or my community were living. Um, and again, this is not across the board, but there was something that I had noticed, I had realized too at one point. I had heard that East Harlem had the highest concentration of housing projects in New York City, if not Manhattan, I believe. Um, and so what I noticed was there was still the schools were being defunded, so the kids were being poorly educated. Health was a concern. Food deserts were a concern. Urban deserts were still a concern as well, because there were some streets that had no trees. So if you had a 95-degree day, that block was more like 102 because of it, right? So there were things that I was noticing that I could put a political lens on as I got older and kept coming back to visit my mother or hanging out with some of my homies in East Harlem, because that was my heart base, if you will. That was my soul station. I mean, it's interesting when I visit classes, especially high school classes, where these poems are often used, that, even in 2022, um, I have kids saying, oh, yo, my block is just like this. And, on the one hand, you know, I'm thinking, wow, so my poems are resonating. But on the other hand, I'm like, damn, things really haven't changed that much, right? These conditions as they are set up for a reason, right? So um, those are the kind of realizations that I see. And when it comes to things like police brutality, I mean, if we had iPhones and smartphones and social media back then, the proliferation of trauma that you would see would maybe outweigh what we're seeing now.
mm.
It was horrific, right? So part of the writing process is how to um, deal with that level of trauma that maybe we had no business experiencing at such a young age. Um, and it's not so much that you want to cast um, a lens on the community that might not be the most favorable, but as you noted, that while there is that level of violence, while there is that level of heartbreak, while there is that level of, say, domestic abuse, to serve as a sort of counterpoint to that, to serve as to balance that a little bit, there has to be a fracture of hope. There
Looking up
has
at
to
the
be,
stars.
right, exactly. There has to be that opening into what you call the infinite. the possibilities of what might be there for us to observe beauty.
So when you said the proliferation of trauma, that was immediately what I went back to, is that even amidst this proliferation of trauma, people are still looking up at the stars, which to me says they still have a soul.
Yeah.
All right, so we want to stay on home for a minute, and I would like to go to your mother.
Hmm.
And if you would please read page 29, Unemployed Mommy.
Yeah. So this was this is a hard poem to read. Obviously, I lost my mother in December of 2020, and she was one of the hundreds of thousands of folks that died behind COVID-19. Um, and I remember reading this poem during a performance at Lincoln Center. It was indoors. I think it was at Alice Tully Hall, I believe. And she was still, she was in the audience. Um, and whenever she went to my readings, without fail, she would burst out into tears. Right, that sort of motherly pride that would happen. But there was one moment where there's that line where it says, "Look at your mother when she was 18 years old. She was pretty like those girls on TV." And from the audience, you hear, "I still am," and the whole crowd just kind of burst into laughter. So she had her moment. My mother had a way of taking over a room, if you will. She was a Leo to her heart, but
Ooh,
she had a
wee!
big, she had a large personality and a larger voice. So I wrote this for her. Unemployed.
Wait, hold on one second. If
Yeah.
you would please read that as well as True Colors right behind it, and then let's talk about those together. True Colors is
Which
on page 51,
51?
and
Oh, you wanted
Unemployed
me to
Mom is
read
on.
that after? I
Please.
got you. Okay. Even though she don't have a job, mommy still works hard. The last 23 years of her life have been spent teaching a poet and killing generations of cockroaches with sky blue plastic slippers, TV guides, and pink tissues. She prays for the poet as he runs into the street, looking for images of Boricua sweetness to explode in his face. The young roaches escape in the dark while my unemployed mommy goes to sleep cursing at them. Even though she don't have a job, mommy still works hard. She walked behind my drunken father in the rain as he stumbled into manhood in oblivion in America wearing his phony Mambo King pinky ring. He beat my mommy. He beat my mommy. Stop beating my mommy with the black umbrella, the one with the fake ivory horsehead handle. I still hear the same salsa blaring out, the same social club where I used to fall asleep and dream happy lives. Even though she don't have a job, mommy still works hard. Every year she prays for my abuela who died in a sweet bed of holy water and Bengay while the poet was kicking his mother inside her stomach. Mommy looks at Miss America, Miss Universe, Miss Everything every year, and then she runs into her bedroom to dig out her high school yearbook from underneath her pile of important papers. Look, Bubble, look at your mother when she was 18 years old. She was pretty like those girls on TV. You still are, I say. Even though she don't have a job, mommy still works hard. Lately, she plays slow songs of lost love over and over and over. She looks out the window only when it rains, measuring the teardrops against the raindrops. Where is that man? I wonder as I sit in my room writing and rewriting a poem for her. I catch her peeking at me from the corner of her eye, wondering if I really do love you. And that's not the record, that's me, I say, hugging her with a kiss. Don't cry, mommy. Even though you don't have a job, I know you still be working hard. Um, I should say that, you know, reading this poem, I think about the images that I grew up with that I needed to sort out, obviously. Um, and in the process of writing about, what I experienced, there's a level of vilification that happens when it comes to my father. But I should really add that my father was really responsible for my love of music as well. I lost him in October of 2020, a few months before I lost my mother. And I grew to really love my father. Uh, and we sort of sorted some of this stuff out toward the end of his life. And I think it's just necessary for me to add that after reading this poem, which is a difficult poem for me to read. I think you start to realize that there's a reason why you don't read these poems as much uh, in many ways. But there is this image I always have of my mother who, when she was heartbroken, she would look out the window, and she was a smoker. She would smoke a cigarette on occasion and listen to either Tito Rodriguez or Al Green. And that's how I knew the role that music played in healing her heartbreak. It could express what maybe she could not express. And if it wasn't Al Green, it was like Barry White or any of the R&B crooners that I grew up with. But Al Green was definitely on rotation for sure when she was heartbroken. So I just wanted to sort of process that in the moment after reading the poem. True colors. You see him now, grabbing me around the neck like I was his son, do this, son, do that, flashing his gold tooth whenever he gets a chance. I might wear dirty sneakers and run to get his silk shirts before the dry cleaners close. But I remember we did a bid together. He used to run and cry on my shoulder like he was my son. Do this, son, do that. So
Was
that's
that
an interesting piece too, right? Because this is not written from a personal experience as much as it is written from an overheard experience, but it made its way into the block that is this book, if you will, right? Um, and the idea of what happens, who we are in those true moments, and who do we become without remembering, right? The art of forgetting usually leads to sort of reinvention, and this was sort of um, alluding to that. Um, Reading poems like this is often dangerous because if you're not in front of a discerning reader, they start making claims about you. So I would have people writing papers about me and calling me a drug dealer and calling me all kinds of things that really were not applicable. But in this particular case, writing this book, most of these poems were written on the corner of 123rd Street in Lexington. So I say that without hyperbole, right? And it's not like I'm pulling out a notebook on the scene, but this is what I'm picking up, you know, as I'm standing there hanging out. So, yeah.
the fact that you were so very young and you could still find, like you said, the Boricua sweetness in the midst of everything else going on, you could still touch the tenderness in everything that was going on when you could have chosen not to. Because it made me think of how many brothers I know who were not able to do that or chose not to do that and decided to just live on the edge and to be the edge themselves, be that hard edge instead of feel those tender places, right? But I was reading and I was thinking, I was like, okay, so poetry helped him to hold on to the tender places. But you were able to do that at such a young age. And I still find that really fascinating. And I was hoping that I didn't cry when you read the piece about your mommy because it made me think of, oh God, all the things that I did not do so well as a young parent, right?
Mm,
And that thing deep inside that where I'm always hoping that in spite of that, I hope my children felt my loving intention behind it. Because there's stuff you just don't know. Whatever people say about preparing to be a parent, it's only so much you can prepare for, right?
Right. Yeah.
Even in ideal circumstances. And there are just things that you're just going to mess up, that you're not going to get right. And it falls on this very tender young one that you love and that you want to protect in so many things. But that was what I was thinking when I read that. He saw through it. He saw her loving intentions. And that's what you chose to hold on to and bring forth in the poem. And I thought the same thing with True Colors, that in spite of everything going on and the reasons why the speaker, and I say the speaker, could be angry or resistant, the speaker still was able to hold on to that tenderness. And that's something that's not easy to do in our communities, right? Because we got a whole lot of reasons to be angry, to be frustrated, to be disappointed. And very often we turn on each other, right? And I just find it good medicine. That's what I call it, good medicine. The way that you can transform that back to the tender place, the tender place. I want you to go next to, would you read Brother Lowe for me on page 33?
Yeah. So, um, it's an interesting point I think you make about making room for the tenderness. I think if we don't do that as poets or even as human beings, then, you know, pieces of our humanity start to sort of dissolve. Um, so I thought that was important. Brother Lowe has made his way into three of my books. So I can have a whole section on Brother Lowe.
Does Brother Lowe know he's famous? Does he know
Uh,
that?
no, I don't. There's no particular Brother Lowe. Uh, Brother Lowe is every man. Brother Lowe is the
Mm-hmm.
prophet. Brother
Okay.
Lowe is the um, he might be suffering from mental illness. He might drink a little bit too much wine,
Mm-hmm.
but sagacious. You know, um, offering sort of wisdom at the most random moments or at most key moments when you probably needed it uh, to hear it. Most importantly. And there were one or two Brother Lowe's in the neighborhood. As I'd imagine, having traveled as a poet, um, some parts of the world and definitely throughout the United States, uh, if you visit some neighborhoods in the United States, you will find Brother Lowe uh, there. So um, here goes, Brother Lowe. A barefoot Brother Lowe came out his hole in the wall and jumped onto the top of the blue mailbox on the corner. He yanked a palm full of strands from his thick black beard and blew them against the breeze that warned of rain. He stretched his mighty arms toward the sky and shouted his daily prophecy to the boys standing near the mailbox, listening to music, drinking beer. Go ahead, laugh at me. You'll spend all day laughing and selling that shit, but I ain't got no time to joke. I speak the truth. The sky is ready to open and rain fire. Nothing but ashes gonna be left where you're standing. One boy drank a long swig and said, let it rain, but you better put on some shoes before the sky opens because your feet stink, Brother Lowe. They kicking like Bruce Lee when he's mad. A loose chihuahua ran away from his owner and let off a nervous bark. Brother Lowe leaped off the mailbox and dashed through the schoolyard. A congregation of born-again Christians were walking home singing hymns for our salvation, pressing their leather Bibles against their hearts. Brother Lowe laughed like thunder having fun. A Metro North train was roaring on the elevated tracks. rushing out of Harlem toward New Haven. No one heard the sky open.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a prophet. And that's a
Yeah.
lot to carry. And I agree with you. I think there is one in every neighborhood if you look closely enough. There's often one in the family if
Hmm.
you look closely enough. And I wanted you to read that because we don't talk about mental health and things like that enough. As a matter of fact, I've been having conversations with people recently about how, in the climate we live in right now,
Hmm.
mental health needs to be a concern for everybody, the
Yeah.
young people as well as the older people. It used to be only Brother Lowe's had that concern, and we could, like push that off to the side. And often we would act like we didn't see them or whatever. But now mental health needs to be a concern for everybody because there's so much going on and we're bombarded with so much. And I love the fact that you closed once again. And I don't even know if you notice it, but you closed the poem once again with the infinite possibilities of the sky,
Hmm.
right? And the promise that the sky holds. So I do want to move on because I told my husband I was going to ask you to do this piece.
Hmm.
I actually read it to him. Harlem plays the best ball in the world, page 55. Now, listen, I'm like, okay, hold on. The best ball, maybe, right? But the best ball in the world, you just went on and claimed the whole world. I
I
love
sure did,
this.
right?
Yes, you did. Do you play ball as well?
I used to play high school ball. My son is the ball player now, so
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So this poem started on a stoop on 115 East 122nd Street. I had heard this the name Joe Hammond, and the way um, the brother was talking about Joe Hammond as if he was talking about a god, a legend, and I got really curious, um, and then near the Schomburg Center for Black Research over there on 135th Street off of Lenox, there's a school, there's a playground, and I don't know if it's still there, but they had this exact uh, phrase painted on the wall: Harlem plays the best ball in the world. And
Mm.
so that's where I got um, the title. And I think if I remember, shortly after the book came out, I used some of this poem to do, and I was thinking about this the other day, a Nike commercial, but it was on the radio. And I remember being in a cab one day and it came on, right? It was one of my prouder moments as a poet, being in the New York City taxi. This is way before Uber and Lyft and all that, and hearing the poem come through on the radio
Wow.
station. Yeah.
Wow.
Harlem plays the best ball in the world. I've heard all the stories about the black magicians performing on courts where you had to come with your own tricks if you wanted to play. I've heard all the stories about the days destroyed by a white horse that came galloping through the Harlem village. Summer night stories when fun was a game won, and then turn out the light set. Let's rub a little, kiss a little. We only got today forever, baby. So can I have this dance? I've heard all the stories about these legends, like the goat who could dunk twice in a single bound, or the sound of helicopter rising to snatch a stack of quarters off the top of a backboard, and the destroyer who coulda, woulda, shoulda had a sneaker named after him. But the corner had more money than the court, and after the game, it was time to get paid. We could blame our mothers, fathers, rain, snow, blow, broken homes, but the legends I heard about rode express trains to games where players pay with blood and die without a pot to piss in.
I love how it's a praise poem It's a praise poem for the black and brown body, right? That is so often misunderstood and unappreciated in so many ways, like endless ways. But this is a praise piece for the black body and the power of that body, right? And like you said, like they were superheroes and the things that they're able to do, and how so many of them don't get to go certain places because of that. So that was a favorite that I needed to ask you to read. So I have one more,
Mm-hmm.
one more, and I'm not going to tell you why I want you to read it, but I'll ask you about it later. Poet in Harlem, page 52.
Yeah. So when I used to, when I was an assistant to Marie Brown, I would walk from 154th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue down to 145th Street and St. Nicholas, down the hill to 145th and Lenox, and then about 20 some odd more blocks to 125th and Lenox, and then a few more blocks east to 122nd, a few 125th and Lexington, and then I was home on 122nd. That was my routine. And I did that with intention. So if you notice, if you've read the book a couple times, and if you notice, speakers in the poems are usually in transit. They're taking trains, they're taking buses, they're walking, but they're always moving. And part of my process, if you will, was to take this walk and just soak up the sensory sort of explosion that Harlem can be on a Friday night. Um, and that would be everything from a church revival, closed door coming in on my left ear, tambourines to glory all day long, drums and singers, and then a car with a booming system playing KRS-One on my right ear. It could be a double dutch sort of impromptu tournament in front of a stoop. Could be a siren passing by. Could be an epic dice game, and I've seen a couple of those with just large audience, and the sort of refrains coming out of the dice game. It could be someone getting their hair braided on a stoop. It could be a curse out of a window. And so I would walk looking for imagery, looking for sounds, and just soaking it up. By the time I got home, I'd open my notebook and relay into my notebook what I had just experienced. So this is what, how this poem, I think, was born. Poet in Harlem. That night, he went looking for a poem. He left his electric typewriter humming on the kitchen table and ran out to the wide sidewalks of Lenox Avenue. Aunties sat on their stoop box seats, mixing cheers and gossip, beers on the down low. With arms thrown to the sky, I celebrate a touchdown. A poet must look at the whole picture. One man's victory is stalked by another man's loss. The voice inside my head began to whisper, damn, one of them young bloods might grow to be a poet in Harlem. Or the little brother who caught the game-winning touchdown might have to sleep in the street one day. That night, he went looking for a poem. He found two colors of love. A teenage couple embraced by a bus stop. I read his lips as they whisper a sweet something into her smile. And that voice that never goes for a walk comes to visit again. I hope their dreams come true. In one ear, and it stood as the poet turned the corner. He bumped into an ancient argument. Two fallen angels with scratched throats pull and push each other. Ain't enough for both of them to get high tonight. Used to be he would serenade her under a clear moonlight, and that voice meets him in front of the liquor store. Ain't no room for kissing and hugging in the middle of the night when luck is hard to find. The poet came back to his kitchen table with the last voice that sounded like the blues. So he turned the electric hum into this poem. Show me a woman who is strung out on love. I want to support her habit.
You're so wrong for that. You just so damn wrong for that. Because and I'm not even gonna say why. I'm just gonna claim it. So here's my question for you.
Yeah.
Did you ever find her?
I'd imagine so. Yeah, throughout.
No, hold on. No, Willie, no. You're not gonna get to do that. Not no, I imagine so. That's a yes
You
no
trying to
question.
try.
If you gonna go ahead on and claim that and say that in the poem, this is a yes or no question. Did you find her?
Yes.
And did you learn how to support that habit?
On occasion, I did, and on occasion, I did a bang up job. If I'm going to be honest, right? Like, love is a complicated thing, but there is this. I've always had and I think I might be exploring this, but I always think about Billie Holiday when I write this poem, right? Like, what might have she needed for it to be right when it came to her heart, let alone the abuse problems. And is it truly a matter of love being able to save us? I would say yes on that very good day. But then again, one must face the reality that maybe it's not enough.
That's a powerful way to end the poem.
Yeah.
To leave those words hanging because it asks all of us, are we doing enough? Can we
Right.
support a habit like that?
I like the way you phrase that. Can we support a habit like
Yeah,
that? It
can we
almost sounds
support a habit?
destructive in a way, given the word
Yeah.
habit, right? But I mean, as poets, we can twist that into something beautiful, right? So yeah, I like the way you phrase that. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
I
not.
like the poems that you chose. A lot of contrast gainers in the poem. There's a lot of contrast there. So it's making me think about my young poet self in a way that I haven't for a while.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question.
Okay.
If the Willie Perdomo now could speak to that young poet, what would he say?
The first thing I would say is that you're going to be all right, man. Like, whatever it is that you are, whatever crew of demons that you might be confronted with and processing in this moment, you have to know that you're going to come out on the other side. It's going to be all right. But you might have to take this journey. And you might have to take this journey without the benefit of a guide. That's one thing. The other thing is that I would have implored that young poet to read a lot more, because I spent a lot, like I said early on, the world, the street was my text. So as much as I was spending time in the library, I was spending just as much time on the street. And you wonder to what extent um, where my practice as a writer would have developed had I spent a lot more time reading. And when I say reading, I'm talking about reading widely, reading poems from Africa and China and really all over the world, reading different genres, of course. My library consisted of maybe the same 10 books that I would read over and over and over again, I think, if I recall. And then I would go to the library and find anthologies where I would read poems and listen to them out loud at open mics and so on and so forth. But I think those would be the two things that I would tell that young poet, the assurance that you will come out on the other side of this journey, and that you should spend a little bit more time in the library in doing so.
But if you had spent a lot more time reading, you wouldn't have been able to take those long walks. You wouldn't
Touche,
have
you
been
got me. I
able.
think you're right. I think you're completely right
Wait,
about it.
wait,
So,
and I'm not finished. I'm not
yeah,
finished. And you wouldn't have been able to preserve that Boricua sweetness
yeah,
in this book.
yeah. I
You
think
know what
you're
I'm
right.
saying? So it's a toss up.
I think you might be 100% right on that. Again, I would emphasize that the world, the street, the city was my ultimate text. It was the book.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So use your imagination,
Mhm.
right? What would you be without poetry?
A photographer.
Mm, I can see that. I can
Yeah.
see that. I can see that because you got that eye for detail. You see
Yeah.
things that nobody else sees, like the two lovers, right? And him whispering. Okay, that makes total sense. Whew. I just have to say really quickly before I close, the words that you said to young Willie are words that so many brothers need to hear. So many brothers just don't have anybody to tell them, man, you're going to be all right. I just, and I say that from the bottom of my heart. My youngest is a 17-year-old son, and I have several sons, and thank you for saying that, because that wasn't just for the young you, that was for a lot of people that need to hear it. And as a matter of fact, I have a student that I'm definitely going to share this with, and I know it'll be a blessing to him. Thank you so much for coming and spending this time with Breakdown. I'm so sprung. I mean, the king stepped down from his throne for a quick minute. Hey, to bless us. I am very, 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 very grateful, and I appreciate your time. So I
Thank
won't
you.
keep you any longer, but thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, folks. So we're closing this episode of Breakdown. I want to let you know the bio will be in the bottom of the video. Please check out Willie Perdomo's other books and his other projects and the amazing things that he does all over the place. He performs and does all kinds of things. You might be able to catch him in a workshop or something like that. So please stay tuned and support the poet. Show the poet and the poems some love, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Breakdown.